digital innovation is running breakneck in so many ways, and yet the number of times that I've seen a digital innovative solution come across my desk as a company or a startup, and then they say, look, clearly they even have the data, they have whatever it takes in order to prove that they would be a positive influence on the system, either patient outcomes or reducing costs. But their ability to penetrate the healthcare systems in terms of implementation is being held back. It's a huge hurdle for adoption based on the fact that the systems themselves don't want to adopt them. The purchaser, the hospital system, the doctors, whatever, they won't adopt it. And the question was, what is the cause of these hurdles? How do we de-risk that decision-making process? For that matter, should we? Is it a problem that the innovators themselves are not pursuing solutions that are attractive enough for the adopters? Or is it a case of the system itself? Or what can we do in order to ease this method? So the first of my speakers is Ed Miller. He comes from the Center for Medical Interoperability. This organization was funded specifically to figure out why different sandboxes won't talk to one another, right? I mean, it's essentially like why my RCA cables on my TV don't fit into my VCR if I have to move healthcare systems. But it also has expanded a little bit into the health record space as well, I understand. And maybe just a little bit of background on what the problem is in terms of interoperability and how you guys are trying to solve that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. And just to start, I'm impressed with your endurance and the way you've been able to go through session after session after session. But it is a pleasure to be here. And just to provide some background on the center, we are a nonprofit collaborative R&D lab that was formed by hospitals and health systems to really advance the state of interoperability in the industry. And we were really formed based as a result of what was proven to be a preventable medical error in a very acute episode of care in an ICU. And when the team back then at West Health diagnosed that, they discovered that the patient was in a room. There were 13 different medical modalities connected in and around that patient. And all the data needed to treat them successfully was in the room, but unfortunately it wasn't orchestrated. And that led through a series of steps to the creation of the center. And the model is pretty simple. We would bring together the users and the procurers of digital technologies for healthcare and align them around a technology architecture and interoperable interfaces that are agreed upon by the companies that provide the equipment. So we set about that mission. We developed a lab. We brought in 40 different vendor companies. We demonstrated the feasibility. We launched a certification program. And we discovered that just getting the things interoperable, and our model is connected, interoperable, and trusted. Just addressing that didn't really solve the issue. And we identified certain patterns of what was happening. A vendor would say, well, I can share data, but I don't want to share data with this company because I'm afraid, I'm concerned about what they'll do with it, or I'm concerned if I share this data, will it be misused? Hospitals say that, I want my equipment to be interoperable, but I have this legacy issue, and
let's get to that point.
Yeah.
So there's a reticence on the players in the market to work together because they're afraid they're giving up their competitive advantage, or is it just paranoia? Has there ever been a situation where that actually happened? Because I can think of lots of other things in my world where they operate with one another. I mean, even Microsoft and Apple eventually got along in terms of software designations, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but it took government action in a lot of cases. What's the answer here to convince them that it's like we just need to do a mind warp and convince them it's in their own best interest?
Well, they're all conflicted. So on one hand, they want to interoperate, and the vendors were remarkably supportive. On the other hand, it is a complex ecosystem, and just achieving technical interoperability doesn't solve the problem. So The way we've described it is that what is lacking is really a system for trust. And I've been really fascinated by how many times the word trust has come up in the sessions today. When you look at the barriers to interoperability in healthcare, you realize pretty quickly it's not just the technology. It's the clinical use of the technology. It's the underlying contracts. It's the financial.
Yeah, but I mean, we've been through this. I mean, let's be realistic. When you talk about, one of our doctors made a great observation that if you go to a cocktail party, everybody will tell you what their medical problems are, but no one will tell you what their financial situation is, right? So clearly, the individuals in America actually guard their financial privacy a lot more tightly than they guard their healthcare privacy, and yet we have a way of creating interoperable financial instruments. I mean, it seems to me we have dysregulation in that sense.
Yeah, interoperability happens pretty well in a lot of other industries. I came from an industry that was completely interoperable, and that was achieved.
Sorry, tell me a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, I came from the cable television and telecommunications industry.
You want to talk about regional battles between people that literally hate each other or acquire each other based on the smallest differential in outcomes, right? And they manage to work together, and we have one plug that goes into my TV.
And broadband is the same globally. The technology that drives broadband in your home in the United States is the same as the technology that drives broadband in Europe and Asia and everywhere else, because they were able to agree and align on an approach. And in healthcare, it's been the non-technical barriers that have really been the challenge. And aren't
it would be like if my Apple mobile phone couldn't call a Samsung, basically.
Yeah, that would be kind of the outcome there. Yeah. So we've come to the conclusion, and this is what we've been working on in the center, that just dealing with technical interoperability is not enough, that the industry needs to really align on principles of trust that get to the non-technical factors. There are 6,000 hospitals in the country about, and there are 6,000 different ways of doing things. And what happens to an innovator, a startup company, when they come into healthcare is they have a technology idea and they do it with the hospital, they demonstrate it works, and then they go to another hospital and the integration is all different. So more and more of the resources go into integration and a one-off integration with each deployment, and it uses up the resources. So it's very difficult to get over the hurdle. So this really is a scaling issue. And the goal is to create some templates and models so that it doesn't have to be invented every time, which is what happens in healthcare.
So I mean, we have like the basic interoperability, the my sandbox versus yours kind of problem. Then we have the operational insecurities or issues with all of these hospital systems that have been built on essentially bespoke backbones, digital backbones. Then we have the electronic medical record issues in terms of different systems that you may apply there. And then they've all been integrated into their system. We're essentially like 30 years ago with bespoke computer systems every time you wanted to build out an office building, where you had to do a massive cutover from one telephone system to another, because no one used the standardized solutions or out of the bucket solutions. With that, I'm actually going to be bringing in our doctor panelist for this. Sindhu Pandit actually comes out of Salesforce. So she has some small amount of understanding about software and interoperability and how you build a middleware platform or a standardized platform that you can still provide bespoke solutions on. But importantly, she provides medical advice to them in terms of how they're trying to integrate different systems. Isn't that right, Sindhu?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, and it's been very interesting to listen to you, Ed. I am a practicing PM&R doc based in New Orleans, and I'm a clinical lead industry advisor for Salesforce and their HLS practice. So happy to be here and happy to participate in this conversation.
So from your standpoint, interoperability is one problem, but there are other problems out there as well. Maybe you can deal with that and then kind of merge into what the other problems might be, and we'll bring up the panelists afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ed hits on a lot of really important points. I think we were able to accelerate some of the adoption in this last couple of years because of probably more regulatory and policy changes than anything. To his point, I don't think a lot of the technology is new. I don't think we had a shortage of data before. I don't think it was even the capacity to utilize the tech that was out there. I think it was just breaking down some false barriers that's been put up over the last, I don't know, as we've grown as an ecosystem, and we had to work over them, through them, around them to get the work done. And it was a lot of, I think it starts there. And not to mention that the other portions are not important, but I think having a national strategy in which you're approaching data exchange and sort of leveraging the data for, kind of the greater objectives in healthcare is a really important place to start.
What about the actual solutions themselves? I mean, have you seen problems with adoption of digital device or digital solutions simply for non-interoperability issues?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the digital divide here, so I think the latest stats I've seen out of the Pew Research Institute were, I think 97% of Americans have a cell phone, not a smartphone. But it's really interesting if you look at the map of where, kind of where this is, if you look at the map of areas that you do have pockets of cell phone deserts, if you will, or smartphone deserts. And I think 15% of American adults use their smartphone as their primary way of accessing the internet. So they don't have broadband at home or broadband access. And again, if you look at the map, these get concentrated in particular areas. So on one hand, to Ed's point, you have the systems trying to integrate and be interoperable and kind of leverage data and whatnot for better insights and better action. On the other hand, we have to be very mindful of those that we are serving and how they are consuming the healthcare, and to remain smart and have tight feedback loops on that and what's working, and maybe perhaps where we're missing things, and to ensure that we're mindful of any bias that might be coming about in how we're delivering some of the care.
And of course, this gets us back to the issues of healthcare equity and the aspects of access as well.
Yeah.
That frankly, broadband is still an issue, and is actually a key determinant of health, is whether or not you've got broadband, as we learned in many different times. All right, I'm also going to bring our two panelists on. So Aditi Joshi. Aditi actually is one of our clinical advisory board members. She's an expert in telemedicine and other aspects of what's going on. Sindhu as well, of course, is, but Aditi is also a clinical advisory board member. And but she has deep experience both at the Jefferson Healthcare System as well as a number of other places. Currently, you are are we allowed to talk about your responsibilities?
Sure.
Okay, so please just tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk about Ruby as well afterwards.
Yeah, sure. So I used to work at a startup and then an academic medical center in telehealth. And so I have a lot of that experience of trying to integrate into health systems and then being on the health system side itself. And currently I'm a telehealth SME for a company called Panda Health. And the whole idea is looking at the entire spectrum of various pillars of digital innovation. And I'm on the telehealth one. And looking and trying to create a portfolio so that health systems can have a good idea of what is out in the market. So it's been a fascinating experience just having these conversations on all of these sides. So excited for this conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. So Ruby Gadarab represents MDisrupt. Now she's coming at it from a slightly different point of view, an extremely valuable point of view in my mind. They work with startups that are in the digital space and attempt to try to solve problems for them in terms of getting them into these hospital care systems. And so she's very, very aware of all the pushbacks she often gets from these systems as to why they say no. So Ruby, give us the top 3 reasons why adopters say no, we don't want to do that.
So good to be here, Michael. This conversation has been so good. I've been listening to it for nearly 3.5 hours now. It's fascinating. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Ruby. I am the CEO and co-founder of MDisrupt. I have been commercializing health products for 24 years. And in the last 5 years, I consulted for 25 digital health companies back to back. And I discovered a few things about the market. So one of the things I discovered is that many of the founders who are founding these companies do not actually come from a healthcare background. And the issue with not coming from a healthcare background is that there is a formula to how you develop, commercialize, and scale a healthcare product. And it's also a very highly regulated industry. And you're also talking to the most skeptical audience in the world, right? Physicians, payers, health systems, every stakeholder in health.
Why are they so skeptical in your mind? Like they're just all paranoid? They've been drinking bad water, or they have a reason to be skeptical?
No, the skepticism comes from the training. Most of them are scientists and doctors, and that is actually how you are trained, to question everything and to ask for the data. Show me the data needs to be a really key mantra of digital health. So when I speak to health systems and payers about digital health, nobody disagrees that healthcare needs a digital transformation. The problem is how we do that. And the problem that they tell me is there is so much digital health being thrown at employers, health systems, and payers. There's almost saturation. And there is no place that any of us can go to figure out what is good and evidence-based in digital health. That is literally missing from this industry. And so what they say is, well, we either ignore some of these companies that come to us because we don't know who they are and what they do, or they say we make them do pilots and only the fittest companies will survive. And that's kind of terrible on both sides. It's terrible for the health systems because they're missing out on huge opportunities with great products. And it's terrible from the industry side because they just can't get the traction through the door. I have a lot of things to say about this topic, but I'll stop for a second and let other people speak.
Not at all. I'm going to hand it off to Sindhu now, since she is the co-host here, and allow her to kind of direct the traffic from this point on. Please take it away.
Well, I kind of want to keep hearing more here, and I want the others to chime in. I think that's a really important point. A recent something that I read said employers are now dealing with up to 16-point solutions to manage health and wellness for their employees. I can't even imagine the point solution overload that these employees are facing. So even if you're having an ailment that could benefit from one of the solutions, just that exchange is hard. And then, of course, if you expand it to what's happening in the larger ecosystem, as a provider who treats a very vulnerable patient population, I don't know how to help sift through what's available and then, matrix that with what's paid for. And then, do they have access to that with regards to whatever internet access they do or don't have? So I'm going to open it up to the floor from the different perspectives that we have. How do we go about creating an environment where we can start to create that evidence-based, those insights, if you will?
So that's something we're actually doing at MDisrupt, not to be self-serving and promote my own company, but that's literally what we're going to be doing. There's two main insights that I think are really important here. So firstly, digital health companies, the best ones, have clinicians at the table in the product development, and they bring them in early and they engage them often throughout the process. So that's one of the things that I think is really critical in understanding clinical workflows, understanding how to solve problems, how to generate evidence. The second thing that I think is important is that clinicians in community medicine are actually involved in the testing of some of these products once they make it into the market. There's something missing in the world as well for the real world performance of these products. How do they work in the real clinical world outside of study settings and outside of large academic medical centers and in the community where we have diverse populations and even diverse physician populations of different types of skill sets, different knowledge bases. And I think that's the second piece that really needs to be a part of that. And then the third part is where's the centralized data set that lives on how these products perform in the universe. And so there's some of the things that we are taking on as some of the challenges in digital health at MDisrupt.
That's great. I'm sorry, I promised I'd hand it off and then step back, but I just wanted to introduce our last panelist here, Kate Berman, joining us from Kids Act, well, she's from Children's Hospital of LA, which I'm keep trying to call Chola, but they refuse to pick it up. But anyway, so Children's Hospital of LA, but with the Kids Act program, which is an aggregation of children's hospitals, specifically looking to implement digital solutions in the pediatric care space. And some of what I would like to hear from you, Kate, and then I'm going to step back again, I promise, is a take on what you're looking for when you do adopt a digital solution. Now, understandably, most of you're thinking about it much from a therapeutic side of things, as opposed to from a hospital systems side of things, which are two decidedly different topics. But let's talk about this digital therapeutics and what makes you decide to try to implement one of those versus what turns your nose, so to speak.
When you're talking about a digital therapeutic, are you meaning like prescription digital therapeutic or just digital health solutions that impact?
You know better than I. You tell me what the heck I just meant.
I was like, I could talk about one of my favorite prescription digital therapeutic companies, Limbix, but I think what you're asking, is what we're looking for from evaluation side, because Kids Act essentially starts with a problem first approach where our health systems tell us what problems they're facing, and then we, source and recruit startups that we think can have both a real impact on care, but also since they're earlier stage, we have to place a bet on, which startups will actually, be feasible for our health system partners to work with. I have a public health background, so things that I personally always look for on the team are solutions that are rooted in, again, a real problem and evidence-based wise. So I really resonated. I think I don't want to mispronounce their name, but Adi put in the chat that as a founder, his experiences that inventors prefer unregulated products with faster go to market. It's sort of a catch-22 with our early stage companies because they often don't have the pilot partners yet, or enough pilot partners or a sample size, large enough to fully prove efficacy of product. But I think at least like having something that's science-based or science informed is something that I very much look strongly for, especially if it's impacting actual care delivery. There's of course a bunch of other solutions that are more focused
on science-based, not just complete snake oil, because we hope that at least the startups that we go through, we demand a certain level of data and clinical efficacy proof. But there are still cases where it's like they're showing a clinical, like they actually show trials, they actually show there's an improvement, and yet people are still nervous about adopting them. Why might that be?
Yeah, that's you mean why are the providers? I think a lot of reasons too that providers are or people that are in these decision-making positions, there is a lot of just barriers to the change management side of things, or what will this look like if I introduce this to a department? I know that, burnout is a huge issue right now. So I think there's this also hesitancy of having to deal with training and further cleaning procedures and further introducing new things when people are kind of trying to stay afloat. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges I've seen right now in our digital health space is like these solutions are actually have the power and the ability to democratize care and reduce a lot of burdens, but based on still the fragmented ways systems are set up and the absolute like burnout and retention issues folks are dealing with, it's a really challenging time to like introduce what still feel like novel concepts, even if they're kind of table stakes patient experience or provider experience solutions.
You also have to remember too, so I'm a physician as well. And I've working in telehealth, I've had to almost a decade, I still have had to convince physicians to do it. In that in general, physicians don't really have a boss in the way that other people think, right? So we have chairmen, we have people who tell us, here's where you're going to work. Here are our research. Here's what you need to do to keep up with your CME, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't actually tell you how to practice on the day-to-day level, right? We all have to keep within our standard of care, and we learn our standard of care in our medical education, which has not changed very drastically for decades. And so when you're trying to introduce something new, you do have to show not only the efficacy that you're saying that you have the data of, and I'll tell you, even having that data is very difficult in the first place. We get pitched all the time at these health systems with very little data because they need the data by doing the research. But then also The burnout one that Kate mentioned, that's absolutely true. You just can't do one more thing, but you really have to do a lot to convince physicians that it's going to be safe, add to the quality and standard of care. And because we don't have a standardized way to do that with the way that technology has changed our lives in other ways, this ends up being part of that barrier to have that conversation. What has worked and generally does work is, one, you do quickly show that it is safe and efficacious, and it does improve quality, right? There is some research that backs it up. That will change it. I think what we talked about in the pandemic and the panel on the pandemic proves that, right? That will change things quickly if you can prove that. And then two is forcing physicians to do it. That really is, unfortunately, the way that it happens. I will give you an example. When we wanted to roll out our telehealth program within our department, we were just Jefferson, we do telehealth. This is who we are. And so physicians who work there would do it. And that really would be part of how we changed the way they thought about it.
What kind
I would
of
add to
incentives?
that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what type of incentives are you seeing that can like nudge that behavior, actually like celebrate that type of positive change or adoption?
So I think that's a great question. I think there's no great answer to that, but I think what has happened is just necessity. And I think because of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of this research studies. I will tell you, just even from the beginning of the pandemic to the end, the amount of research studies that looked at a number of digital interventions was incredible, how much more there was. And now people are interested in this topic. We're seeing a little bit of going backward a little bit, as you do with any big push forward. But now they know that it's here, it's part of their lives, it's part of what their patients want as well. And that's a big piece too. Patients know about it and patients want it, because patient engagement is a whole other topic. But that has been some of the incentives that have done it. And the fact that various bodies have now, within the medical education bodies, have said, hey, telehealth and digital health are going to be big topics. Telehealth specifically has now core competencies that have to be taught in medical schools. That's huge. As far as digital therapeutics and other digital interventions, that will just be the next step.
Well, the other thing as well that adds to that as well, Aditi, other than efficacy, safety, burnout, is actually reimbursement. And so there's this weird chicken and egg scenario between the providers and the payers, where the payers don't want to pay for something until they can see the ROI and physician adoption. And then the physicians don't want to adopt it if it's not going to be paid for and they don't know how to reimburse for it. And so that's another thing that I think is also really important that digital health innovators have to think about, is what is the reimbursement strategy going to be, and how are they going to create, this is another scenario where they have to show me the data, how are they going to create the data sets to prove to the payers that this is something worth investing in?
No, I was going to take 10 seconds to say what Ruby had said earlier, bro, about getting the research on community physicians is 100% true, because it's true. Academics, they set the standard, but most of the data and where most people practice is in the community places. So that was just a really big point I wanted to just highlight as well.
Yeah, I think it was actually the same kind of vein I was thinking is workflows and kind of reimagining how these tools fit into workflows, instead of just, kind of traditionally, these are rolled out and yes, you either use it or you're either using it, how move forward, but really being thoughtful about the change management aspect of this. What are you seeing, given this adoption that we've seen over the last 2 years, and from your side as well, with regards to the kind of the changes we've seen along with pulling data sets together?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. One thing for sure is that the COVID pandemic has greatly accelerated the rate of innovation in healthcare, and we've had some of our CEOs, our board is made up of CEOs of hospitals and health systems, and they've said that in 1 month they've achieved more than they've achieved in years in the past, just out of necessity. And in the conversation, it's interesting here. We talk a lot about trust at the center and the 6 dimensions of trust that you have to consider if you want to have a new innovation adopted in the health system. And it starts with the clinical and operational implications of what you want to bring in. And that's the workflow and the safety. The technology is pretty clear, but from there it's the financial, which is the value proposition and the financial model, and that's all balanced by what's the risk posture for this, the risk and liability. So there's always these competing forces that tend to complicate things, and then there's the contractual. What are your legacy contracts, and how's this data going to be shared, and what's going to happen to it? And then finally, sometimes the trump card is the regulatory and the policy implications. You always have to make sure that you're compliant with regulation, and sometimes regulation is the only hammer that seems to be able to break through the other 5 barriers. So for me, this conversation is interesting, and it's just more examples of how this is a complex ecosystem, and you have to pay attention to the details in order to innovate.
Yeah, those are great points. Ruby, your thoughts on the change management and sort of the adopting some of these solutions into the workflows as they are, as we've seen over the last 2 years?
I think one of the themes that's come up a lot here, and everybody's mentioned it, is trust. And a few months ago, I was interviewing Dr. Shantanu Nandi, and he said to me, medicine moves at the speed of trust. And that stuck with me so deeply, because that sentiment echoes across every single part of healthcare. Trust between the provider and the patient, trust between the systems and the and industry, trust in research, trust in clinical trials. And so that's one of the things that I think is really, really important, is to develop that trust. With regards to implementation, again, some of the most successful digital health companies that I see are the ones that involve the clinicians early on in the process, make them a core part of the executive teams, because they're the people that understand healthcare from the inside. They understand the problems, they understand the workflows, they understand the potential solutions, and they know how to communicate with their peers. Doctors do not want to be marketed to by sales and marketing people. They want to see what their peers are saying, and they want to see what the data says. And they, to me, are the key to solving some of these implementation challenges. You got to get in it from the point of product development.
Great, thank you so much. And Kate, I'll come to you with that question, and as well as from the perspective of taking care of, the heterogeneous populations that your system serves, and ensuring that we are balancing pilot programs, et cetera, with taking care of, making sure we're not missing out on addressing vulnerable patient groups or specific areas, or making sure that we're accounting for bias.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, that's something that, in our first year of the program, we weren't as stringent as evaluating. And I think that it was definitely a learning for going into year 2, that it's criteria that we absolutely want to put front and center, and not just as an afterthought. I think that, certainly language and having solutions that are appropriate in terms of, health literacy language, or just content that's in different languages, depending on what the solution type is really important. I also, think from like an equity and access perspective, thinking about which solutions will be able to reach certain types of people and various just cultural or social norms, or lack thereof, around use of certain types of technology is honestly probably only going to come about through these founders actually, work, seeking out and working with these groups, or having people like us try to connect them to other perspectives and things. Something that came out of our last program actually was somebody had designed a wearable for parents and providers, and he had a bunch of different personas, and stuff that we helped work with him through is, understanding different parent archetypes, and maybe saying guardian, or having different visuals of who those guardians and kids are and what they look like, so that when they are, presenting the content to children and families, they actually look like the folks being served at patient populations, and having kind of flexibility and understanding that different households are comprised of different guardian figures and family types, and language and cultural, type. So that was, I think, useful for our team to say, hey, nobody in your deck looks like anybody that's in our patient population. Like, you might want to be mindful of, or not even mindful, you might want to take action on addressing the diversity that exists outside of your lens.
So these are all amazing pieces of advice for our startups, and I'm hearing a lot of that. Like, we can create an educational video out of this panel, I think, in terms of for digital startups, what they should be doing and changing for their pitches. But if we invert this question, is there anything about the system itself that we can innovate around? Are there things that we can propose? If I was going to be a startup that said, I'm going to solve the problem for other startups, is there something that could be plugged in that you would actually say, I'm going to create a tool that's going to ease the way for digital adoption across the board? Is that even possible?
I think it is.
And it looks like your company. I know, Ruby. That's great. That's wonderful. I already did that once with AngelMD. Yeah. How about for something other than our self benefit?
Well, I think the point about that is actually how we bring diversity to the table of the development, right? So it's not just physicians and engineers. It's also having diverse folks in leadership positions in some of these startups, to the point of, patients trust doctors that look like them, right? And we have to account for some of these things. And in product development, technology development, in some of these things, I'll give you an example. Wearables. Wearables use a type of green light to measure heart rate. That green light works less efficaciously on darker skin, right? When we start to use those wearables to make cardiovascular disease predictions, we're not creating equity there. We're actually creating a bigger digital divide, right? And so these are things that we have to think about in product development. And it's not just on things like that. It's even on things about how we develop algorithms for some of these products.
I'm 100% in agreement with you. I just, because we're wrapping up soon, and this is the final wrap, folks. Mm-hmm. I do want to try to get into, I guess, much like we don't want to hear that the right way to lose weight is to eat better and get exercise and go out there and change your behavior. We want a pill for it. I'm wondering, from a digital solution standpoint, is there a magic pill? Is there a software program out there that could be written? Sindhu, maybe you come in as a panelist on this one. Essentially, do we need a middleware platform that solves some of Ed's interoperability problems? Do we need a centralized database format where I can now translate via handshake all of these patient data into something that is usable from these digital operators? Give me something out there that I can say this would change things. Or tell me that I'm smoking, I'm smoking rainbows here, and I've got no idea.
No, I mean, I think we've all kind of seen some of the opportunities that are ahead of us, and a lot of that has to do with data exchange, data aggregation, and data reconciliation. It's not that there's not enough data, and we're just we're getting more and more streams of data to use and to sort of interpret at the bedside, chair side, whatever, but also just in general, as these systems are moving forward in terms of operations and figuring out new reimbursement models. I mean, there's just so much happening at this speed. I do think looking at things from a platform perspective and being able to plug in devices as needed or solutions as needed, and thinking about public-private partnerships. I think there's a false barrier between public health and health delivery that needs to be looked at, and the fact that I think the points made around multi-sector engagement is paramount. I mean, we can learn so much from what's already been studied and kind of deployed in other industries, and we could bring some of those learnings into healthcare. But knowing that healthcare delivery is local and that there's cultural sensitivities and regional sensitivities we have to keep in mind, and it's that feedback loop. And so whatever platform we end up moving forward with, I mean, I wish I had the crystal ball, but whatever we end up moving forward with, it has to be a one that everyone sort of comes together on, and trust has to be at the center of it. It's sort of the credit bureau for the new world of healthcare. It's this idea that we're going to be able to have this central repository where we can pull the data together, but we really can create a 360 view of the patient, but continue to learn from it. I think that learning component is so important. We cannot just get static. It has to remain dynamic, and we're going to make mistakes, but we have to be open to that and have these really difficult conversations. This dialogue has to continue, but I can't agree more that clinicians have to stay engaged across the spectrum, but multi-sector and public-private partnerships.
Is this a question of, and I know your answer, and I'm going to shoot it down, but the problem is, it's like, I'm going to shoot it down ahead of time. Is the problem an industry problem, a regulatory problem, or an innovation problem? And here I'm shooting you down. Don't tell me all three. Tell me the one of those that you want the most of. And I'm putting it on the spot. And that's going to go to everybody here, and that's going to be our wrap question. Sorry, and I'm leading with you, Sindhu.
Oh man, I can't pick all three.
You can't say all three. No, you can't say a little bit of everything. No. It's not that kind of pizza. You get one time.
I'm gonna offer hoping for leadership. I think and you didn't even give me that option, but I'm gonna go with leadership.
Oh yeah, that's kind of an opt-out, because leadership where? Leadership across all three. No.
I think you can. It's like a Venn diagram, which is one of my favorite types of diagrams.
I know. That's why I want you to pick one circle. That's the point.
Well, I mean, I will take the fifth on this, because I do think you need all of those entities. I really just think that this is a really pivotal moment in healthcare, and we need all of those individuals and more, all those areas and more at the table to kind of drive this forward. And there is no one group that's the problem, or the one group that's going to be the savior. I think we all need to come together and pressure test solutions and continue to learn. I know it was a cop-out.
Show me some courage. Pick one. And all three are important, but like the one that you think we need to push hardest on, is it changing industry, changing regulation, or innovating?
And Michael, I'll offer.
I'll jump in. Thank you.
Yeah. I very much agreed with your question about the platform and your assertion about the platform, and Cindy said, trust for that and collaboration. So what I think needs to be brought out, and it could be a for-profit, a nonprofit. We have to think about that, but a platform brought to the industry with the right governance model so that it can be trusted. Because when a proprietary company tries to solve it and they come out with their platform, which is what happens, it inherently is not trustable, and that just perpetuates the issue. So it's just another way to do it. So I would say the industry needs leadership to come together, and I mean, it's going to take some investment. The innovation abounds. The innovation really comes up with the barriers to scaling.
So we're talking about like Google and Microsoft getting into a knockdown, drag-out fight again to be the public-private partner of the system. It's like what do they call it, Jedi program, whatever, all over again. Is that what we're talking about here?
Well, hopefully it's a little bit more of a collaborative governance. Because the people, the entity that need to use this platform need to trust it.
Well, as long as we're wishing for things, I wish I was 20 years younger. So, that's equal likelihood of what's going on. Aditi, sorry, you looked like you were about to jump in there. What do you got?
Sure. I'll take your bait. So what are my three options? Innovation, regulatory, and what was the third one?
Industry, like changing the industry, the way it works internally.
Okay. So believe it or not, I'm going to say innovation, but not because I don't believe in the innovation. But I think in the last couple of years, we have seen how the rest of this industry really has not kept up with the innovation, how fast it's been going. So this is a time to really get the other partners up into the level of the innovating. Innovating is going to happen regardless. So how do we get everyone else to catch up? And so that's why I will say the innovation. But I do believe in innovation, before anyone misquotes me.
That's all right.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's going to be what we need to do, because this is where we're finding the barriers, right? We have these conversations.
Kay wants to jump in on policy here, Aditi. We got to get everybody a chance.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Past the hour, I'm cutting people off and getting punchy.
I know I was going to say I got to go soon, but I just think policy ultimately drives the incentives for change. And like if policy isn't making kind of the common sense or the healthier choice, the easy choice, then people are just not going to be able to do it. We've even seen it with like vaccines. We've seen it with other things. Like if certain policy incentives are not at play, then like large scale population level change isn't going to happen. So I think that the interdisciplinary approach, what Sindhu said, is like the most important, but I just think policy nudges a lot of other levers.
All right. Well, good news for that is our next conference in the Impact series is the Impact Policy Conference coming your way in May. We're going to be spending these next few months trying to implement innovation changes that we're specifically directing towards family office, but we will be engaging on an ongoing basis to try to put together a policy framework in order to address these same topics. Ruby, do you have something to take us home?
I was just going to answer your question and take your bait as well, actually, which is two things. If I was to pick one of your three, although I don't think it's any of your three, I would pick the healthcare system.
Oh, give me a fourth. You're already to pick it. Just not something generic like leadership.
Yes.
That kind of applies to all three.
So I'd pick the healthcare system because everybody keeps saying it's broken. It's not broken. It's actually doing exactly what it was designed to do. We need to rethink how we do healthcare. If I was to say who is the single source, if I had to pick one, even though I believe it's collaborative as well, I would actually say it's the payers. Like how something gets paid for drives how it gets adopted. And so one of the biggest influences of the payers is actually employers, right? So I think there's an interplay between payers and employers that can really drive change.